Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. We are so close away, 24 hours away from our first fall camp viewing, and we appreciate you for tagging along. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like it, and set up those notifications. If you're listening, we appreciate you, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Bryce Koon alongside Glen West. Glen, I just said it. We're here. We are on the precipice of fall camp. Football is finally here. We're in a month where we're going to see football games. Not the LSU Tigers, but hey, I don't know about you. I can get excited for week 0 games. I just love college football that much. But fall camp starts, Glenn, and I wanted to start it off and kick it off with this question. Obviously, as fan base knows and our viewers know, I was not here last year, but I think this is a perfect question to kind of kick us off in this conversation. How much does this year's camp differ from last year's, maybe in the feel, maybe in the preparation, and just the overall mindset? And that might be a question for Kelly, but for you, how's it differ in sense of where LSU heads into 2023 opposed to 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're starting in just an exponentially better place than you were last year. I mean, at this time, they were still really figuring out how to get this culture established, how to get everybody on the same page. It was a struggle from what we heard last year, just to make sure that every player, every coach, everybody was just kind of in lock unison. And I mean, you kind of saw it in that Florida State game early last year. It was very sloppy, and it just wasn't I think the start that LSU and certainly Brian Kelly had wanted for that team. But you flash forward several weeks, and the team really seemed to kind of start to find their groove in the season. You're not going to have that problem this year. You're going to be you have enough of a returning core and foundation, I think, to really hit this thing in stride in fall camp. I think there's a lot of positions that are more or less settled. You're not going to be having guys competing at every spot for a starting role. I mean, there's going to be, for example, we know Malik Neighbors is going to start at receiver. We know Brian Thomas is probably going to start at receiver. Mason Taylor is going to be your tight end. I just think that there's a little bit more clarity on just kind of what this roster looks like at most of the positions. And certainly I think defensively you're going to be having a lot of competition, particularly in that cornerback room. And we'll get into all that here as the pod goes on. But I just think that they approach this second fall camp here with a lot of momentum, a lot of development. We've been talking and writing about here the last couple of weeks about the development in terms of the training and the off season, and how a lot of these guys are running faster than they ever have. They're doing a really good job of being in the right shape and the right mindset, I think, to approach this fall camp the right way. And then we can also take it from a media perspective. This is going to be a very open fall camp. We did not have that last year. There's going to be 8 or 9 practices where we get the 10 to 15 minutes of viewing to shoot with cameras and photos and whatnot to get all that stuff that we need. But then we're going to be able to hang around for the majority of all these practices. And that'll be great insight for the viewers. It'll be great insight for the fans, just what we're able to pick up on. And I think that the fact that they're opening these practices up a little bit tells you just kind of the mindset that they have. They're very confident in what they have returning. They're very confident in the approach, the scheme, the plan in place here for this team. And I think all that is really good signs here heading into their year 2 here under Brian Kelly.
You talked about Brian Kelly, the confidence that this staff has. One of the big things, Glenn, when I can't remember if it was media days or if it was Kelly speaking at the Rotary Club, which is kind of the 2 big final media appearances he does before, obviously, breaking fall camp. But he mentioned about, the roster construction, and they probably need one more really good class. And that kind of just brought to my mind, where is this group kind of, in your opinion? We've talked about recruiting, the recruiting run they've been on so recent. But in 2023, I believe that this team thinks that they can win a national title and they can at least get to the playoff. Like, I think that they have the confidence. Where do you sit? I mean, last year you tempered expectations. You didn't know what to think. But this year, does the accelerated process of last year getting to Atlanta, does it move the bar beyond reach, in your opinion? Or kind of where are you setting the bar as we get ready for fall camp? Kind of a little too early down the road, but I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question. I mean, anything less than 9 wins, I think, is a step back. I mean, I don't think you can go into this season and have 8, 7, 6 wins kind of thing. I mean, that would not be good at all, particularly considering the returning core that you have, especially on offense. I think this is a double-digit win team easy. I think if they
Mm.
get past Florida State here in week 1, their schedule really is favorable. I mean, they have a pretty difficult start on the SEC in terms of road games where they got to play a lot of their early schedule here away. But it also, I mean, I think 4 of their last 5 games in the SEC are at home. So like
Yeah.
there's some good and some bad with that. But if you get through the early part of your schedule unhitched, you're looking at potentially that November game against Alabama being 2 top 5 teams competing for that SEC West title. And that's the position that I think LSU is going to strive to be in. I think they can certainly get there. But yeah, I absolutely think that the next step for this group should certainly be to get a college football playoff berth and at least compete for a national championship. I think
Hmm.
that is a realistic goal here. Even if you don't win it this year, it gives you just such great ammunition if you're Brian Kelly and this entire staff to really show the country that you're on the right track and that you're going to be a force to be reckoned with for years to come.
Yeah, a lot of media has outside the LSU sphere kind of has them as that dark horse SEC contender to make the playoff. And it's going to be, you would think, easier next year. I mean, when you start to get in the 12-team playoff, I know we've talked about that on podcasts before, but that's another podcast for another day. We talk about fall camp here on a fantastic Wednesday. Glenn, let's take a first look at this offense. What's something that maybe you want to see? I'll hit on what I want to see after you, but what's something that you want to see or need to see? And is it as obvious as what does Daniels look down like down the field? We've talked about that for like ad nauseum at this
Yeah.
point, but what's something you really want to see kind of that first couple week or two of fall camp?
Yeah, I'll leave the Daniels and the quarterback talk to you. What I want to really see, I think, is the evolution of this run game,
Mm.
particularly with kind of the new faces that you brought in Logan Diggs and certainly Trey Holly, Caleb Jackson, Kevontre Bradford now coming back to the roster, John Emery being reinstated. I think is going to be a really big boost to this group because last year those guys were really kind of they were inconsistent, and I think it's a team effort. Obviously, the offensive line needs to continue to develop and get those guys the running lanes that they need. Jaden Daniels needs to evolve as a play caller in terms of recognizing the right checks and when to audible to different plays and stuff like that. But I think that they're set up to be a much more explosive run team this year because of some of the additions they've made, because of the depth that they have. I'll be very interested to see how they kind of divvy up the running back reps here in fall camp for the first several weeks. I kind of have gone in with the mindset of thinking it could be a 3-man approach and Josh Williams, Logan Diggs, and Noah Cain. I think that is probably the three that carry the bulk, get the bulk of the carries, the bulk of the touches in the backfield, at least to start the season. But that doesn't mean that somebody like Caleb Jackson, who I also wrote about this offseason, is a guy who I think could be a real X factor for this team to come in and really explode from day one and really give the coaching staff something to think about. So I think that they're in a much better place to have a more explosive run game. I think it would certainly open up the rest of the offense if you could get those guys a little bit more consistency in their carries. But we'll see. I mean, I think that there's going to
Hmm.
be some real competition there. I think that's the one spot on offense that is really kind of up for grabs in terms of carries and who's going to be out there. So it'll be very interesting. That's going to be the thing that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch the quarterback conversation because we've done that so much already this offseason, but I am going to talk about some weapons. And you mentioned the running backs. I'm going to go receivers. And you said it earlier. I mean, look, Malik Neighbors is a guy that I think by the end of the season, we're going to be talking about him if he decides to take his talents in the NFL as a guy that could be a day one pick. He has that ability and maybe potentially at least, a day two guy. But when you look around him, you mentioned Mason Taylor. I mean, we know the weapon that he can be, the weapons they brought in the tight end position. But my question kind of lies, who really steps up and emerges as wide receiver two? We all kind of assume that it's going to be Brian Thomas and what he's been able to do, but does he have that breakout year? Another guy in Kyron Lacey, for me, I mean, look, a big-bodied physical receiver that I think kind of I think it matches up well with what Neighbors is. I mean, you have a guy in Neighbors that is I don't want to say speed first, kind of a do-it-all guy. Neighbors really is that. But a guy in Lacey that you feel like you could really target down in the red zone, can get you those pivotal third down plays. Does he step up and find consistency? I know he struggled with drops a little bit last season, something that plagued him at times. Is that fixed? And then, obviously when you get to the young guys, you got to kind of group Aaron Anderson along with a crop of freshmen they brought in. What can you get out of Aaron Anderson? What does he look like? And I wrote about this, and I think it's, a good article for people to kind of check out in the sense of there was a lot of excitement when Aaron Anderson joined LSU, and due to the surgery that he had that kept him out of, spring football and everything, I feel like it's not that it's died down. We just haven't talked about him. Like we just haven't mentioned his name. And so is he a guy that's going to come in and, contribute to the conversation we've all had about Jaden Daniels being able to take the top off of a defense? But we got a good podcast coming up with an LSU, a fan favorite. And he mentioned, those freshman receivers as guys that can make an impact if they can find consistency in fall camp. And I think when you look at those guys, I mean, Shelton Sampson, Glen, you're going to have to fill in some names. Kai Preen, a guy. The other two guys, the names are slipping my mind. Kyle Parker is a guy who's an athletic freak. Jalen, yeah. And so when you have these guys, it's for me, you have a lot of mouths to feed. Who establishes maybe in the first week or two is saying we can be consistent and the coaches can count on us for meaningful reps? Because like I said, you're going to hit the ground running in that game against Florida State. There's no tune-up game. So, I mean, you're going to have to lay that foundation and that groundwork in fall camp. So I think offensively, I like what you said about the running backs. Mine kind of sits with the receivers. And you could talk about offensive line. I think that it's a veteran group and it has a chance. I'll ask you this, Glenn. Does this offensive line have the chance, if everything clicks right, and look, there's some seasons it does, some seasons it doesn't. If they stay healthy and everything's clicking, where do you think this group ranks in the SEC or the country? I mean, can it be one of the best this conference season 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Look, Georgia has some really good players. Bama has some really good offensive linemen as well. But I think LSU is right there with both of those programs. I think that they have done a nice job in a very short order of replenishing that group, developing that group. Brad Davis, I think, has probably been one of the elite gems of this coaching staff, and the job that he's done in just a couple of years being on board here. I just really like what I've seen out of that group. LSU has been not shy about posting like videos throughout the offseason of these guys working out. And in a lot of these videos, Will Campbell and Emory Jones are just two consistent faces that I see, just really putting in a lot of work. And, I know you can't take off everything from just these little short 90-second clips, but they really do seem to be front and center of this offensive line and just kind of the leadership group that's there. I think that the experience that those guys got last year, all playing together, and the fact that you got pretty much all of them back this year, that is just such a big deal in this day and age of college football, when you have so many players leaving to the portal or to the draft after 2 or 3 years. To have that continuity carry over on the offensive line, to have another year of development under Brad Davis, I think this can be one of the best groups in the conference. And it's going to really play well into what I was talking about earlier with the running game. I think that's going to be where you really see this group take that next step. And I think they can really, really, really explode this year.
Yeah, I like what you said there, and the thing you got to be excited about too is with both those guys, that they're going to be there for at least the next 2 years, this season and next season, and that's really exciting.
And you got a guy like Zalance Hurd, who is a 5-star player, who I think LSU believes can play right away. We'll see if he's able to really compete for one of those outside tackle jobs. I mean, I think I still kind of am of the belief that if Zalance Hurd is ready to play, you play him at right tackle and you slide Emory Jones in at guard. I think that is probably the ideal top performing kind of offensive line that you could have this year. But if Hurd's not quite ready, if he needs some more time to maybe adjust to the college game, I think you feel really good about what Jones can do on the outside at tackle. A lot of those guys were mixing and matching positions this past spring because they were low in numbers. So I think you can really carry that into this season, and I think those guys are going to be ready to perform and play well for LSU this year.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big questions, at least from the outside looking in, when I look back to when Kelly was hired, is how quickly could the trenches get ready to compete with the
Mhm.
likes of the upper echelon teams in the SEC? And they're answering that question in a big way, obviously on the recruiting trail, but obviously with the way that Davis is developing those guys on the line. Let's switch over to defense here, Glenn. And it's another topic. Everyone's talking about Harold Perkins, and for good reason. Nearly unstoppable last year. We could sit here and we could, take the free throw, take the easy shot here, and talk about where is he going to line up, and maybe that's where you go with it. But when you look at this, what's your big question on the defense? Where do you think, and what do you need to see from this LSU group here in 2023 in the fall camp?
Yeah, I mean, there's a much simpler answer than I think even Harold Perkins. It's the secondary, it's the cornerback room. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
been talking about that pretty much since the end of spring. Those guys really, really need to come together and develop quickly. I think that's probably the one group that you look at, and it's like, all right, well, we know we have some dudes. Can we get those
Yeah.
guys ready in time to be a cohesive unit by the time Florida State game gets here? And I don't know the answer to that question right now. I'm not sure that Brian
Mm.
Kelly knows the answer to that question right now of who's going to be on the outside. We've speculated all off season. I would imagine there's some combination of Denver Harris, Terrence Welsh, Zy Alexander, J.K. Johnson. I think those are kind of the four that kind of come to mind. Deuce Chestnut will be competing at that nickel spot, I think, with Sage Ryan. Sonny's got some great notes up, some great tidbits up of just what he's hearing. And I thought one of the bigger takeaways was Sage Ryan kind of really trying to solidify that spot,
Mm-hmm.
get some consistency down. If he can fulfill his potential as a former 5-star prospect and really start to make some plays for this secondary, I think that completely changes the dynamic back there. But it's always it's going to come back to how they rotate on the outside. I think that's going to be the big question mark. And I like the talent there. It's a group with a lot of potential. But you're also hoping that guys like Greg Brooks and Major Burns can stay out of trouble with their injuries. I mean, they've had some
Mm-hmm.
injury bugs the last couple of years, particularly Major Burns. If those two guys can stay healthy at safety, um, where they pegged freshman Javian Toviano, I think, is a very underrated question, kind of heading into this offseason or this fall as well. If Toviano, they feel like he can really compete for one of those outside corner spots, I would put him out there in a heartbeat. I think he's one of those guys that can come in and compete and play well right away. And then you just figure out the rest from there. But I do think it's going to be a little bit of just a little bit of a struggle in terms of figuring out who's going to be reliable there for that first game in the secondary.
Yeah, I'm going to move it up to the front seven and really that kind of defensive front. I mean, we could talk about Perkins. We can talk about the linebackers. The guy that won, I think, the Iron Tiger Award, Omar Spates. It's one of the things that Sonny put up another tidbit. So this is a guy who is really impressing folks down there. We talked about when he transferred in from Oregon State. But I don't think anybody can knock the fact that when you get Mason Smith back and you get to pair him with a guy like Mekhi Wingo, Glenn, I've told friends, they've asked me about what I think LSU can do. I think that you might have the best duo on the defensive line in the country. I mean, you really could have that with the way that Mason Smith plays. Obviously, we know who he is. Mekhi Wingo came on last year and what he kind of lived up to the billing, and it was one of those things he wasn't necessarily shy about at SEC Media Days. He kind of laughed it off and talked about it. But when you have guys like that, and then he mentioned a guy that I'm really excited to watch, two actually, in Ovia Gofu is a guy who has been a physical presence that they brought along over there. And then Braden Swinson as well. And I'll even throw a third. Everyone is raving about Jackson Howard. His physical, build, what he's been able to do, just impressing the staff, being one of those early enrollees. So I think when you take a look at this front seven, the names Harold Perkins, Mekhi Wingo, Mason Smith, those are the headliners. Like those are the guys that are going to get time on the front page of the magazine and going to get their, billboards posted throughout Baton Rouge. But who else steps up? And, the transfers they brought in, Jackson Howard, a young guy like that, and just some of the other names that we just don't talk enough about maybe, and maybe they're buried on the depth chart. But Glenn, you know as well as I do, like if you're going to get to your goal, and obviously this team's goal is to be the last team standing, you have to have rotational playable depth. and the front seven. You can't just roll out two All-Americans and say we're going to play these guys until they pass out. That's not going to work. Elite teams have that. And so I'm excited to see what that group looks like, because I think it's a group that, we talk about the secondary, we talk about the linebackers, we talk about offense, but this defensive line has some of the talent, like on paper talent, to carry the defense at times.
Yeah.
And I think it helps with the secondary too. Like if they can create disruption, it's going to help with that secondary.
Yeah, I think the underlying question there also is that, we kind of you kind of brushed off Harold Perkins just because he's so great, but I think the way that they line him up and the way that they use him this year,
Mm-hmm.
it's really going to open up the defense for success for guys like Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo, and Deshaun Womack is a guy you can throw in there. Ovie Ogofu, Quincy Wiggins was another name that we've been hearing a lot about. Savion Jones is going to take over, I think, that Ollie Gay role. Where you line Harold Perkins up, he's going to be the number one guy that opposing offenses are always going to go up to the line of scrimmage and say, okay, where is he? Where is that
Yeah.
guy? Because we need to find the matchup for him, and then we can worry about everybody else. And when you start worrying about everybody else, that's when guys like Mason Smith can really make an impact. And I think that's just going to be a really, really important key for this front seven and really for this defense as a whole. Because, the way it sounds like they're going to use Harold inside some, I still believe that he's going to be making his most impactful plays off the edge. And wherever they line him up, I think he's going to be able to create a mismatch somewhere else. And if you can get Mason Smith one-on-one in the interior, if he fulfills his potential, if his injury is really a thing of the past and he's looking like the guy that was going to really break out last year before his ACL tear, that's going to spell damage and really spell trouble, I think, for opposing offenses. It's going to really help LSU, I think, be a great run defense on the interior. You're going to be able to rotate guys in like Paris Shand on the interior. Jordan Jefferson is a guy that we heard a lot about heading into the spring, and we're really excited to watch, but he just got hurt, and I think it sounds like he's okay and is going to be ready for fall camp. So getting to see a lot of those guys up front and how they rotate them. This is also going to be the first time we get to see Jimmy Lindsey out there and what kind of impact he has on this group. I think he's somebody that has something to prove. I think he's a guy that is coming in from from South Carolina and really feels like he can make this an impact at a program like LSU. And how he develops this room, I think, is going to play well into how he's able to recruit in the future. And so we'll see exactly how ready those guys are to take that next step as a group. But when you're starting with Harold Perkins and Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo, some of the other really young, exciting pieces on the edge like Womack and Wiggins and Savion Jones, you're starting at a really good place. And I think that's going to be, a really good kind of identity for this LSU defense is really relying on those guys and seeing what kind of pressure that they can create consistently in the backfield.
It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, Glenn, but we're certainly not going to leave this position group out. Special teams. I know it was a sore spot at times for this fan base to watch. How do you feel about the special teams group coming into fall camp? And what do you need to see? Whether it's out of Ramos, obviously you get a veteran Bramblett back at punter. You feel good about that. But this is a group that, in a spot where, once again, if you're going to be an elite team, you've got to have some big-time moments, big-time plays from your special teamers. So where do you kind of sit in maybe the confidence rating of this group heading to fall camp? What do you need to see?
Yeah, I mean, look, for about 5 or 6 years there in the middle 2010s, I think LSU had the best return game possibly in the entire country. When you talk about some of the names that went through there, whether it was Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, Odell Beckham Jr., I think even Jarvis Landry had a couple of returns every once in a while. But that was an identity of those teams in the early 2010s, was being able to create some really good field position because of elite return play. And really the last several years, you haven't seen much of that from LSU. I think that they've been very cautious in how they use their returners. Particularly in the kickoff game, they don't really like to return a lot of kicks, and that's going back previous to Ed Orgeron. I mean, they were not really returning a ton of kicks, and so I'm excited to see kind of what happens in the return game. I think Aaron Anderson is a guy that you put out there at kickoff, at punt return. We saw it when he was a high schooler. If he got the ball in space, nobody was catching him.
Game over.
And I think if he's able to do that at this level, he can make a couple plays in some big time games for you, whether it's returning it all the way for a touchdown or flipping the field, getting you out of a bad spot in the, kind of in the 10-5, goal line yardage looking kind of area. But yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest thing for me is, can they get some more explosive plays out of the return game? Place kicker, look, I don't really know what to make of that position right now. You got Dybert and Ramos competing for that spot. I think Ramos, from what we've seen and what we've heard, has done a nice job in the summer. But there was really some question marks, I think, after the spring of what that group is going to look like. But I'm much more excited and interested about the return game, and if LSU has enough dynamic playmakers back there to really make that a valuable spot for LSU to be able to turn a game or two around with some of those plays.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have the ability to be a game changer, playing the game of field position in a tightly contested ball game. So, special teams not overlooked, especially here on this podcast. But hey, we're getting ready for fall camp. Obviously, if you're watching this on Thursday, then fall camp has started. We've got some great content. It's a better reason to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. You can get some awesome footage, some awesome pictures over on Go 24/7 of kind of what this 2023 team could look like, and all the news and notes you could want and more. For Glen West, my name is Bryce Koon. We appreciate you so much for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like, subscribe button on YouTube, or if you're listening on podcast as well, make sure to follow us and comment down below and leave us a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get it. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.